Good morning. It's Amanda here with a little tidbit from the Bible today. For an assignment recently, I had to read all of Mark and all of John, and I did that in one day, which is a lot to take in, but at the same time, it allows you to put the little snippets in all of the Gospels together and see them as a bigger picture. So sometimes in some Gospels, you have an interaction with one character that you don't get in another Gospel. So, as I was reading through Mark and John, some things about Peter really stood out. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. In Mark chapter 8, verse 27, it says this: Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." So in this little snippet between Peter and Jesus, we see that Peter gets it. He understands that Jesus is more than just a prophet. He is not Elijah, but he is in fact the Messiah. So we tend to think, okay, Peter totally knows what's going on with this Jesus stuff. But if we skip over to John chapter 13, there's an interesting episode that we get in John that we don't get in the other synoptic gospels, which is interesting. So it is the Last Supper, and Jesus, this is what Jesus does. I'll read it for you. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that is why he said not everyone was clean. So this is really interesting too, because Jesus shows them an example of what it is to be a servant and what it is to make yourself the lowest of the low, because only servants that had zero status would have ever washed somebody's feet. And so Peter initially refuses Jesus, but then because he doesn't totally understand what Jesus is doing, even Jesus says, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. And as soon as Jesus says, "Listen, I have to do this or you don't have any part with me," Peter immediately changes his tune and says, okay, wash my feet, and then wash my hands and wash my head, just to make sure everything is clean. So he doesn't totally understand what Jesus means, but he is so eager to be with Jesus that he wants to go that one step beyond. And so we also know the story, I'm not going to read it right now, about how Peter is upset that somebody's going to betray him. And Jesus said, later in chapter 13, Simon Peter asked Jesus, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I'm going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later." Peter asked, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Then Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. So again, Peter doesn't really understand what's happening. He doesn't understand that Jesus is about to die on the cross. He doesn't quite get it, but he so eagerly wants to be with Jesus. And later, we read that he does in fact deny Jesus 3 times. But later in John, this is a really special chapter that also appears in John and not in Mark. It's after Jesus has risen and appeared to his disciples, and he tells the fishermen to put their net on the other side of the boat, and they catch this huge haul of fish, and they pull it in, and then they have breakfast with Jesus on the beach around the fire. And there's this really beautiful passage where again it shows Peter's eagerness, but not quite understanding. So it says this. This is chapter 21, verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." So here again, we see Jesus reinstating Peter for those 3 times that Peter denied him. He asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" So Peter has the chance to say, "Yes, I do, Lord." And again, he doesn't really understand what Jesus means. Peter was hurt because he asked him a 3rd time, like, "Why don't you believe me, Jesus? Of course I love you." He doesn't quite get it, but it doesn't stop his eagerness to love Jesus and to follow Jesus. So I think that's just something that I'm going to be taking with me this week, and for many weeks, that I don't always have to understand exactly what Jesus is doing in my life or in the world around me. I don't have to get it all of the time, but the important piece is that my heart is in the right place. My heart is full of eagerness and desire to serve God and to love God, and just to be willing to say, "Yes, God, of course I'll feed your sheep." So that's something that I'm thinking about this week, and I'm praying that I will have the eagerness of Peter, and I pray those things for you as well. Have a nice weekend. I'll see you on Sunday.